Hello, and we're going to start today with a little bit of a discussion on Piaget and how Piaget relates to science education. And I have actually found Piaget's theories to be one of my favorites. And um, I want you to pay close attention to the stages of development because they really do mimic the stages of development of science inquiry. So the first stage of development for Piaget is called the sensory motor stage, and this is where a child is really searching for conservation. There'll be more later on during the course of this course on what conservation tasks are according to Piaget, but one of the first things that a child does when they're born, from about 0 to 2 years old, is they simply observe. They observe the world around them. They try to see what's permanent, what's not permanent. And for the people that are permanent, they make relationships. For the things that are permanent, they reach for them. And so really their life is about a search for conservation, trying to understand what those objects are that are going to be permanent and what the properties of those permanent objects are. Again, conservation. The next stage of development for this child, according to Piaget, is called the pre-operational stage, and this is really a search for representation. This is where the child might take, and this is a phone charger, and an on-the-go phone charger, and they can take this and they can say, oh, it's a phone, and it's a microphone, and it's a weight to weight lift with, and it's a loaf of bread. I'm going to serve you breakfast. And they learn how to write letters and draw pictures. Everything is a search for representation as they acquire language and discover symbolic play in the dramatic play area, and they have dreams. And then and this is from about 2 to 6 or 7, and then at about 7 years old, the child enters the concrete operational stage, which is really simply the child's quest for relationships, trying to understand how things work, how things are put together, the interrelationship between the world and the things that are in the world, etc. And everything is very concrete. Ergo, it's called the concrete operational stage. And then the last stage of development, that's usually about till 12 or 15, and then afterwards, starts at 12 to 15, and then afterwards for the rest of your life is the formal operation stage. And that is really where the child is searching, or the now teen is searching for comprehension. It's trying to understand what is it that goes on in our world. And when you think about science, learning science, I want you to think about the fact that the first thing we do is we make an observation, right? The child from 0 to 2 is observing the world. And when we start to learn about things and we talk about science, we're starting to make observations. And so it's really important that one of the things that we learn is how to be keen, active observers of the world around us, that we can make inferences, we can make hypotheses and guesses about what's actually going on. And then as the child goes to the next stage of development, which is that quest for representation, if you think about how science works, well, now they're trying to see, well, what does this represent, what I'm looking at? What does it actually all mean? And so I need to name it and label it and understand it. And then once they go from there, remember that after that, they're going for trying to understand the rest of the world, which is understanding relationships. So if I see the representation here, if I see how these things kind of group together. So now what's the relationship? What's the relationship between this group and that group? And what kind of inferences can I make about that? And finally, the adult's quest for comprehension is when we do scientific experiments to try and understand what those relationships and everything else are. And, Piaget really was a scientist who was engaged in the discovery of what it means to grow and develop as a human, but he really used a scientific process. And so that's really what it is. And so here at the college level, I'm actually really dumbfounded by how few of my students are actually trained to be good observers before they're trained to be good experimenters. And what I mean by that is that we're all here presumably to learn to be teachers. And we train our students to go in and do activities and to go in and do lesson plans. And there's loads of classes on all different kinds of curriculum. And yet there's really not much more than one course on how to be a keen observer of young children. And that's not even a required course. Think about it. A required course is Introduction to Teaching Young Children and a curriculum class. But the assessment and observation class is not a required course. And I think that we are doing ourselves a disservice because it has to begin with understanding that art of observation, devotion to observation. And oh, what a world it could be. Until next time, this is Dr. Andrews.